A Vow of Thorns and Moonlight. Chapter 1. The Thorn-Tithe. The moon had a hollow in it the year I was chosen, an ink-dark bite, taken from a silver fruit like a warning, or a mouth learning how to speak. The elders called it an omen. Children said a wolf had climbed the sky. My mother said nothing. She pressed her thumb to my brow and traced a circle only we knew, a little prayer we'd kept between us since I was small. "Look at me, Elowen," she said, and when I did, the child in her eyes vanished. "If they call your name, don't run." I laughed then, because laughter was an easier thing to carry than fear. Who would call my name? She didn't answer. The river splayed the moon into pieces. Wind brushed the reeds, and something in them responded, a slim, reedy voice that rose and fell in the rhythm of my heartbeat. The songs in living things had always been loud to me. A curse, a gift, I still don't know. I hid it because those with oddness were watched, and those watched too closely were taken sooner. But on Thorn-Tithe night, secrecy had no teeth. The veil was hungry. The king's envoy had crossed it. We gathered where the beech trees bent toward the water like old women with secrets. The whole village was there, dark blots of wool and leather and breath trembling in the cold. The priestess drew a circle of salt. A black stag stood outside the circle with a cloth of night draped across its back. Upon that cloth lay a crown that looked forged from the bones of a storm. "He sends his mercy," the priestess intoned. Her voice shook. "He sends his peace." No one answered. Mercy from the king of Gloam was a word with a blade inside. He had held our borders for 300 years, they said. He held back the nightmares that multiplied like thistles in the places where the old gods died. He asked for one bride each year, never the same bloodline twice, never a woman who'd already given birth, never one who had a fever, as if fever were the only illness a person could have. We called it a vow. The old ones called it tax. The boys called it a story to frighten girls into saying yes. I had never said yes to anything. That was part of my trouble. The envoy stepped out from behind the stag like shadow becoming man. The beech leaves made a sound like 100 small hands clapping for a play that wasn't funny. He wore no mask as some envoys did, no crown as some dared. He wore a coat the color of old bruises, and his eyes were the pale of moon frost, the kind that makes everything hard and smooth until it breaks. "Your village has kept the oath," he said, as if he were complimenting us on our bread. "Your granaries are full. Your children have all their fingers. I can smell contentment." Is contentment the smell of grain? Old Brack, who had nothing left to lose, lifted his chin. Or sheep dung? "It is the smell of safety," the envoy said. "You have had more of it than most. He has been generous. He never said the king's name. The king had many names depending on which side of the veil you stood. In our house, we didn't say any of them. We said nothing and went on living. The Thorn-Tithe. The priestess's hands shook so hard the salt whispered across the circle's edge. "We present the stones, and the stones choose." 3 stones, worn round as knees from the river's tongue, lay in a shallow bowl. One marked with sap, one with ash, one with a thorn pressed so deep I knew someone's blood had fed it. "By the old laws," the envoy said, almost bored. "Bring the daughters who have bled." Girls were shoved into the circle with gentle violence. I saw Edda's braid, my little sister's braid with its cheap blue ribbon, saw the hem of her Sunday dress muddy, saw her eyes the size of coins. 12 last month. 12 and proud, 12 and secretly afraid of everything that breathes. She had bled a week ago. I had washed the sheets with river clay and lied to our mother because the Thorn-Tithe was coming, and I thought a lie could keep blood from smelling like what it truly was. "Back," I said sharply to my mother. "Keep her behind you. I can talk," Etta whispered, but all that noise had fled her. "She has not bled," my mother told the priestess, before the priestess could look at Etta and see the month in her face. "She is a child." The envoy's head tilted, very slightly, like a wolf hearing a marten in snow. "The circle knows liars." Fire climbed my cheeks. I didn't think I'd moved, but the envoy's eyes were on me now. They were neither cruel nor kind. They were a river in winter. "I bled first," I said, and stepped into the circle. "Elowen," my mother said. I'd forgotten how my name sounded in her fear. The years dropped from her voice, and I heard the girl she had been so long ago, when she believed even the worst doors opened into rooms you could live in. "I'll choose," I told the envoy. "Let the stones choose me." "Do you make the laws?" He lifted a finger. The stag stamped, and in the stamp was thunder. "We do not take the willing." A laugh snagged somewhere in the crowd. "Even the willing are not taken. The veil has preferences." I looked at Etta's ribbon, then up at the hollow bite in the moon. I had no cleverness left to spend. My gift, the hearing of songs, roared in my skull. The stag's breath had a melody like a low bell. The priestess's pulse thrummed a frantic two-note song. The envoy's coat made no sound at all. He was either untouched by songs or made of them. "Draw," he said. "There is something obscene about putting your hand into a bowl of river stones while your whole village holds its breath like someone pinched the sky's nose." The first girl drew sap, her eyes darting like minnows. Sap meant next year's veil on your doorstep. The second girl drew ash. Ash meant never. She collapsed, sobbing, having won the lottery none of us bought tickets for. The third drew sap. The fourth, sap, sap, sap. We were a forest alive with spring. My hand sank into the stones. They were cold and slick and all the same until one pressed like a mouth lining up with mine. I grabbed it and showed it, because there are little moments when bravery is refusing to make anyone wait for cruelty. The thorn the priestess had pushed into the flesh of the stone glinted dark red. Someone screamed. "My mother didn't." "Name?" the envoy asked, formal at last. "Elowen Reed," I said. My voice sounded like I'd borrowed a stranger's throat. The reed bed hissed, and I heard it. Not words, not comfort, merely the acknowledgment of a thing begun. We set out before dawn bled properly into the river. The envoy did not allow goodbyes beyond the circle. He called them rotting ropes. My mother slipped the circle anyway and caught my face a last time, her hands dry and fierce. She pressed something small and cold into my palm, wrapped in old linen. "Your grandmother's charm," she said. "For liars. I thought we were done with lying." "Never," she said, and kissed my temple where she had drawn the circle, and I wanted to be a child long enough to be held until none of this was real. Etta wasn't near. She had hidden as I'd told her, and I could picture her there, biting her braid like a frightened colt. I could picture her hating me for stepping forward. It was better than picturing her across the veil, hand in a dead king's hand. The envoy did not ride the stag. No one rode the stag. It walked ahead at a measured pace, and we followed along the deer path that cut the beechwood into a vein. The envoy never looked back. He walked as if the world belonged to his feet. "What do I call you?" I asked, when the trees closed like a theater curtain behind our village and only birds could hear us. "Do you think it matters?" "It matters to me." I said, and surprised myself with the steadiness in it. If you have a name, I'll use it. If you say nothing, I'll pick a rude one. He seemed almost to smile. You can't help yourself, can you? There's a thread of defiance in you that would rather be cut than tugged. I just want to know who's taking me to die. I am. You're not going to die, Elowen Reed, he said lightly. That wouldn't be generous. What will I do then? I said. Live? He glanced over his shoulder finally, and the pale of his eyes made me catch my breath again. Not for their beauty. Beautiful things become cruel when you're being dragged from home, but for the depth in them. Not a river, after all, but a lake that kept its secrets under ice. Envoys don't have names, he said. Since we are the king's voice, we are called Ve. You're a voice, I repeated. Does he always speak like this, through other mouths? Do you always listen? Ve asked. For music and things that shouldn't sing? I stumbled. I don't know what you... Your heart, he said, is cluttered with songs. I can hear them trying to get out. The groves drew back. We reached the vale at midday, a fault in the air, vertical, so thin it could be missed if you weren't looking for a place where the world thickened and then forgot to be transparent. Heat shimmered across it though the day had chilled. Ve raised his hand. The stag halted. The air smelled like iron and rain and something that had never been allowed a proper name. In the river music I had learned the tune for rain, the tune for lightning far away, rabbits in bracken, willow bark that bent but did not break. The vale had a tune like 1,000 thin things rattling. I wanted to put my hands over my ears. What is it made of? I whispered. Promises, Ve said. What else divides the living from the living? I was shaken so hard the linen-wrapped charm in my fist made itself known. I unwrapped it with my teeth when my fingers wouldn't obey. A small disk of hammered moon metal with a hole in the center lay there. My grandmother had worn it on a string around her neck until she was buried with an empty throat. It was meant to hear truth, she'd told my mother, or make liars show their seams. Sometimes trinkets lied about what they did. Sometimes people did. I threaded it on my own ragged cord and tied it against my chest, feeling ridiculous and strongly seen both at once. Ready? Ve asked, as if we were about to try a new bread. I nodded because my voice was hiding in my bones. He stepped through. It was not dramatic. One moment he was on our side, the next he was angling his mouth at me through a half-step of air that made his features waver like reflections on a stirred bowl. The stag followed him without fear. I touched the veil with my fingers. Promises, he'd said. The veil bit. I jerked back, a hiss escaping me. Ve reached through and took my hand very gently, gloved, cool as river stone. Do not resist it, he said. It will become a wall. Let it take something. What? I heard myself demand. It will take? Ideally, he said, a lie. I could give it one. I had so many. I closed my eyes and held out the biggest I'd kept in my mouth for a year. That I didn't want to leave. That I didn't dream of the woods bigger than ours. That I hadn't wondered if beyond the veil there was a quiet, a relief from having to pretend I heard nothing at all. The veil tasted my lie like a dog tastes salt in your palm. Then it opened, a slit cut in noon. I slipped through with Ve's hand steadying me, and my stomach flipped, and there was the other side. We don't know how to name colors we've never seen. The world on the side of the king of Gloam was both dim and bright. Light lay in sheets rather than beams, shadow walked on its own. The trees had leaves like coins that flashed on one side and absorbed you on the other. Rocks hummed. The ground was soft and hard at once. I put my hand to my throat because another song had begun, a loud one, a deep one, like the beating of a vast heart inside a building too big to perceive as a building at all. "Welcome," Vay said dryly, "to Gloam." I turned in a circle like a fool. "It's not what they told you." He started walking. The stag began to graze on something that pretended to be grass when you looked at it, and something else when you didn't. They tell the worst stories. It keeps children out. Sometimes it doesn't keep brides from running at the ceremony. We don't like to chase. It makes the vows messy. "What happens if I run?" I asked before I could stop myself. He considered. "Your village becomes very quiet very quickly. So mercy like a knife." We walked a long way without speaking. The path curved and then decided it had never been a path. It became a stair made of fog, and when my foot sank, the fog held like glass. We climbed until the thinness of air made me light-headed, and then descended into a valley where ruin slept. If this was the realm of a king, he let it crumble, or it crumbled because that was the law of all things with edges. At last we came to it, the place the song in my chest had been ringing toward, the palace they called Gloamspire. The first sight of it took me back a step. It was not a castle in the way we made castles, stone, arrow slits, banners shouting lineage down the wind. It was an enormous tree turned to black glass, midway through being a tree. It had branches and also buttresses, leaves and also spires, bark and also columns. In the glass I saw myself, and then lost myself, and that made a cold pleasure go up my spine against my will. Vay's mouth twitched again. "If you gape when you meet him, he will be insufferable for a week. He's no one." "I don't gape. Hand a day." "You're doing it now." "I'm looking." "That's what people call it when they gape," he said. And I wanted to hate him and found that difficult. Inside, Gloamspire was a cathedral of echo and light, the color of late plum. Statues lined the entrance hall, the kind carved by hands that had loved bodies and not merely admired them. A woman with a crown of twined ivy looked down at me with a gaze that had been kind once, but now was only weary. Beneath each statue lay a name carved in a spool of letters that wouldn't sit still long enough to be read. "Brides," Vay said when he saw my look. "Honors." "Graves," I said. He didn't deny it. "He keeps vows," he said, "in all directions." "Does he keep them to himself?" Vay's eyes slid from me. "You should not ask him that." "You didn't answer." "I did," he said softly, "in the way that matters." He led me through a hall that seemed built for giants, and then another hall that seemed built for children, and then a room that might have been a closet, but for the window that looked out across an ocean I hadn't known we were near. A sea of trees had made itself into a sea of water. The veil between what is and is possible shook thin. "Wait here," Vay said. "He will come." "I thought kings didn't go anywhere," I said. "This one does." He bowed without mockery and left me with the stag, which had somehow followed and was now chewing on a silk banner. I cleaned my hands on my skirts because I wanted something to do besides overturn the room in search of a means of escape. The charm at my throat ticked like a heartbeat. If it truly heard truth, it would have been deafened. Everything here was some variety of truth. Everything here lied as it told it. I felt him before I saw him. Not Vay's cool winter lake presence, but a pressure, a gravity, as if the tide had turned just a little faster than normal. I turned to the door and made myself still. He entered without escort. I'd expected antlers, claws, a crown nailed into skull. Monsters are easier to despise when they match the size of your fear. The king who came into the small knot closet had a human's height and shape. He was not beautiful in the way ballads like. He was an argument between light and shadow, that light was losing, but not without satisfaction. His hair had the black blue of late night. His mouth looked like it had learned to smile and then unlearned it. His eyes were not vase pale. They were gray, mercurial, the color of a river where someone had dropped a secret. The crown he wore was not bone storm, not thorns, not anything the smiths in my village could have made. It was a circlet of a material I could not name. It moved when he breathed, as if it had opinions. "Elowen Reed," he said, pronouncing my name as if it were a line in a poem he'd liked once. "I am Kael Varis." He had a name. They did not lie. The charm at my throat warmed, as if to say, "Truth." I bowed because I didn't know what else to do. "Your Majesty." "Do not," he said, and the word was precisely gentle. "Majesty is for daylight courts. We have no day." He regarded me, not unkindly, with the curiosity one gives a bird that has landed in one's hand despite the hand's reputation. "You stepped into the choosing," he said. "I didn't want my sister taken." "Why?" "What sort of question?" "Very ordinary sort of question," he said. "Why?" "Because she's 12, I snapped, and shame followed on its heels because I had raised my voice to a king. Because she's small and she cries when the cat catches a mouse. Because she still half believes she'll grow up to be a saint who can make wolves sit and lay their heads on her knees. "And you?" I swallowed. "I believe in wolves." Silence. He moved around the room, not fully turning his back to me, though he had no need to guard himself. He ran his hand along the window frame, and where his fingers touched the glass wood, silver veining followed as frost follows a wish. "You have a gift," he said finally. "You hear the true names of things when they sing. Some call it witch-hearing. Some call it trouble. Here we call it useful. I'm not a witch." "Of course you are," he said, with a tenderness that was almost a taunt. "You survived your childhood with your strangeness intact." He flicked his gaze at the charm on my throat, smiled a small, sharp smile that made me flush for reasons I hated, and then sobered. "Listen, Elowen, there is the story they tell at your beech trees, and the story I will tell you." "I'm supposed to say my vows first," I said, breath catching, unexpected terror like a hand closing around my lungs. The ceremony, the circle, the words I'd thought I had at least a night to be a person. "Supposed to," he mused, tasting the phrase. "We can leave that to later. I've had brides who couldn't stand to hear me before their vows tied their hands. You strike me as a stubborn listener." "Are you?" I stopped. He'd gone utterly still. The room, too. The sea beyond the window seemed to hold its breath. I realized the silence was not silence. It was a listening. The whole palace leaned in. "Someone is dragging a story toward us," he said. "They appeared exactly when and where he was wanted, as uncannily as a hawk's shadow in a field mouse's dream. "Dawnborn at the border," he said. "Priests, 4. Armed like mercies and smelling of new iron. They carry rope. And Doris have to live to disnars." Kael closed his eyes. "They never learn." "Shall I?" "No." He looked at me. I felt the weight of that glance. It was not a hunter's appraisal nor a lover's hunger. It was a judge's consideration of a witness whose testimony could alter a city. "Take the stag," he told Vey. Turn them away with the old words. If they throw sun at you, throw night back. Do not kill, unless the square of their shadow fits inside their footprints. Vey's mouth curved in something that was not quite mirth. As you like. He was gone. Dawnborn, I said. Our priests? Your priests, he said. My enemies, when they try to unmake the veil, they think light fixes what was broken by light. Siege Ray, I don't understand, I said, because I didn't want to pretend anymore in order to keep from drowning. Why do you take brides at all? So the border holds, he said simply. Old bargains must be kept in the currency they were struck in. He studied my face as if my bones had letters etched in them. This is the tale under the tale. Long ago, before your mother's mother's mother taught you to draw circles on skin, there was a king who believed love could be commanded and a god who envied him. Between them they built a wall. The wall fed on vows. If they ceased, the wall would rot, and everything beyond it would cross all at once. This has happened in other places. It does not go well for the children in beech woods. So you feed the wall with girls, I said, and the horror in me cooled to an iron shape. You discovered a way to make the old cruelty look like protection. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth that might have been pain. It is uglier than that, he said. The wall eats love. Vows are its silverware. That is why the brides must come willing, if not in body, then in word. That is why the old laws forbid taking those who have pushed children into the world already. That is why he broke off. What did you think happened to the brides? We think, I said, forcing my voice to hold steady, you turn them into statues. High bees. I honor the dead, he said, almost angrily. I do not delight in them. Then what? The charm at my throat warmed until it was almost hot. If I am to be pawned to mortar a wall, I will at least hear the thickness of the bricks. He looked out at the sea of trees, and for the first time since he had entered the room, he looked truly mortal. Some of them leave, he said. Some of them stay. Some of them become hungry, and I cannot feed them, and I cannot let them starve. Leave? I repeated stupidly, as if the word had grown new edges. Where do they go? Beyond the wall, he said simply. On errands, with me. The wall must be patched as well as fed. He stopped as if he had said too much, then turned back to me. I do not want another bride. My heart knocked once, hard. The charm went cool. The truth of his words sat in the air like a stone that had learned to float. Then stop taking them, I said, and let your sister draw the thorn when a year turns? He shook his head, very slightly. I am tired of choosing harms. The luxury of not choosing is a daylight luxury. We have no day. He took a step toward me. I did not retreat. I would not. But perhaps, he said, voice dropping, something in it that made my hands want to shake for another reason altogether. Perhaps your stubborn listening can help me choose differently. There is a way to unteach a wall its appetite. Its heart must be broken. The wall has a heart? Everything built from a god's jealousy has a heart, he said. It is buried in 3 pieces, and you want me to find them. It wasn't a question. The sea beyond the window reached out one long gray finger of foam and withdrew. That's why you take brides on errands. You send them to fetch the murder of a wall. The murder of a wall, he repeated, as if tasting the words. Yes, and because the wall eats love, only those who could love me, do you see? I think, I said dryly, that if your plan requires my loving you, the wall is safe. It was a cruelty I meant, and it felt like gravel in my mouth. Still, the charm remained cool, and that irritated me more than it should have. "Perhaps," he said, and I realized he hadn't flinched. "Or perhaps you can love the quiet between my words, or my ungentle honesty, or the fact that I have not lied to you once, even as I have told you a story with its edges tucked in." A shock of sound rose from the hall below us, metal on metal, a word spoken so loudly it shook the teeth in my head. Kael moved to the door, half turned, and I saw in him then the king. Even the veil feared a narrowing of intent, a calm that meant something terrible could be done carefully. "We will do the ceremony after," he said, "in a room with witnesses. I will not drag you with a rope." "If you don't do it now," I said, my tongue faster than my judgment, "the wall rots." "A day," he said. "We have a day." "Do we?" He looked at me as if I had said something he'd hoped to hear. "Come," he said. "Watch how I keep you safe using the sort of mercy you despise." He held out his hand. No glove now. I hesitated and then laid my fingers in his. I expected cold. It was warmth that surprised me. A hearth in winter, a wolf's flank, the place where a slow river collects sunlight. The song in my chest steadied, changed key. The charm at my throat heated again. Not hot, not cool. Listening. We moved through halls that folded like a map that had long resented being flat. Courtly figures stood along our way, women in dusk-colored gems, men with hair like spilled ink, creatures whose shapes made sense at the corner of my eye and not at the center. They bowed and whispered. Some watched me with pity, some with hunger, some with indifference so perfect it was nearly art. The fronting doors of Gloamspire were already flung wide. Vay stood at the foot of the steps, the stag at his shoulder, like a heraldic dream. 4 figures in dawn white stood beyond the threshold, their robes stiff with embroidery, their faces pale not with fear, but with belief. Each bore a coil of rope bright as new hay. Each rope sang a thin, eager tune that made my stomach drop. "Rope," I said aloud, without meaning to. "Not for you," Kael said. "They aim to bind the veil to an altar. Don't listen to it." One priest raised a lantern. Light spilled across the stones like a liquid that didn't wet. "By the names of light," he cried, "we unmake the darkness that squats on God's land." Vay's smile had knives in it. He lifted a hand, and night gathered like a cloak in his fingers. "By the names you forgot," he said, "we keep the things you dreamed out of your children's beds." The priests began to sing, a keening thing that wanted to be proof of goodness. The ropes rose like snakes. The nearest one struck at the air, and the air seized, drew back, thinned. The veil shook. Its song rattled my bones. "You said no killing," Vay reminded Kael without looking back. "As much as we can manage," Kael answered. "Elowen, listen." "To what?" I asked, furious, afraid. "To their ropes," he said. "Tell me what lies they were made to believe." I closed my eyes. The world pressed close. The rope's song was syrupy sweet, sick with certainties. I heard a mother promising her boy that if he were good enough, he would never be hurt. I heard a sun drunk on its own reflection, telling itself it warmed even the shadows it burned. I heard a king, as a boy, swearing to his father that he would never beg. "They think," I said, lips numb, "that pain is evidence of sin. They think anything that frightens them was born wicked. They think vows are cages, and cages are holy if the bars are made of light." Kael's hand tightened on mine just once, like agreement. Vay moved like a cutting cloth. He flung the gathered night at the priest's feet. It spilled and became a garden of small, exact shadows. Each shadow reached up and took hold of a rope. The ropes writhed, their songs warbling. The priests gasped. The lantern shook and then steadied. "Turn back," Kael said. When he spoke like that, it was not volume that carried, but certainty. "Your names are afraid of what keeps you. Be afraid with them. We are commanded," one priest said, his mouth trembling around courage. "What we bind is bound. What you bind," Kael said quietly, "binds you to destruction. Leave. Take your faith where it does not break what it claims to bless. And if we refuse—" The lantern's light tried to bite the threshold. It couldn't. "If we refuse," the priest whispered, and I heard it then, the little boy who had promised his mother. Kael sighed like tiredness in winter. "Then we argue," he said, "in the language you taught us." The rope struck. Shadows caught. Night buckled and flared. The priests cried the names again, and the names did answer. A bright, shattering answer that made my eyes water and my charm burn cold and then hot again. The veil trembled. It remembered being young. It remembered eating and being praised for eating. "If they tear it," I whispered, "if they tear it, then everything crosses," Kael said, "and we will have a very short marriage." It should not have been funny. Something in me wanted to laugh anyway. Madness and terror are cousins. I dug my heels into the steps and listened harder. The rope sang too loudly to hear the needed note, and then, beneath it, I found it a thin, true thing like a reed's breath. One of the ropes had been made by hands that doubted what they did, even as they did it. One priest's belief had a seam. "There," I said, jerking my chin. "The youngest. His rope knows it is wrong." Kael didn't ask how I knew. He moved. He didn't run. He never hurried. He arrived in front of the youngest priest, and with a gentleness that felt rude in the midst of violence, he took the rope as one takes a horse's bridle and whispered something, not a name. A name. The boy's name. The priest went gray. The rope sagged. Light went out like a candle pinched. The shock gave Vay what he needed. He slit the shadow tethers, and the other ropes fell like exhausted snakes. The lantern sputtered. The names, those bright syllables, fled back where names flee when they are not wanted. "Go," Kael told the priests, "before the wall asks for more of you than humility." He looked at the youngest, and his voice went softer. "Protect what you love by learning its true shape, not by caging its outline." They ran. Even the devout, when faced with unmanageable truth, will run if given leave. Silence came back to the steps in small breaths that eventually became normal breathing. The veil's rattle subsided. It settled into a hum that my bones quickly called ordinary. Kael turned to me, still holding my hand as if we were two people watching rain. Vay smoothed his coat with long fingers, looked at me once like a craftsman estimating an unexpected tool, and vanished into the house to see to whatever it is that must be seen to, after danger passes without finishing the cup it poured for you. "You ask better questions than most," Kael said. "Most are probably already in love with you by now," I said, trying for a tone and failing to find one that did not betray me. I wasn't in love. I had no intention of it, and yet I felt like a window had been opened and something had flown in that would not be coaxed out. "We have a day," he said, "to decide how not to starve a wall without letting the children in beech woods feed it through me. Will you listen, and then tell me what I do not want to hear?" "You already know it," I said, and the charm against my skin cooled to a quiet. "You already know the thing you don't want to hear." He waited. That you cannot kill an appetite by feeding it differently, I said. You must starve it, and you must teach those it wanted to eat how to be too bitter a meal. His mouth made a shape that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not. Then we must break a heart. The walls, I said, and possibly mine, he said. Something foolish and bright rushed through me like an animal darting across a path. I kept my voice very level. Tell me where the pieces lie. Pain. Already, he looked up at the hollow bite in the moon and the places where the veil stitched itself thin as a wound closing. One, he said, beneath the sea of pines, in the cathedral of bone, where the saints of hunger keep their ledgers, one in the sun-reef, under a city that insists it is holy water, guarded by a creature that does not remember its name, one very close and very far, in a room full of statues who once were not stone. It sits in a bowl no one is allowed to touch. The statues, I whispered, glancing back into the hall where women's faces watched the threshold with the patience of rocks. The brides, the honors, he corrected softly. The graves. He didn't argue. The wind from the forest licked the steps. The stag lifted its head and tossed antlers that wrote cursive in the dusk. I stood on the edge of something and knew it. The edge was a place I had always loved more than I should. All right, I said. I'll go with you. You haven't made vows. Then you will have to keep me safe, I said, without tying me to your wall with words. And if I die, the children in beech woods will die too. So you will keep me very safe, Kael Varis, your majesty. He closed his eyes and exhaled, and this time it sounded like gratitude and fear making a bargain. When he opened them, the gray in them looked almost silver. We leave at moonrise, he said. Eat, sleep if you can. Wear something that can be torn without your heart breaking. He turned as if to go and then paused. Elowen, he said, not looking at me, and I stopped too, because he had said my name like a man about to say something with teeth. A wall that eats love, he said, teaches those who live beside it to treat love as ration. He glanced at me then, very quickly, as if it would be an injury to hold my gaze too long. Do not ration it. He walked into the palace. I stood on the steps while the hollowed moon climbed the fishbone of the horizon, the river's ghost whispering in my blood, a king's handprint warm on my palm, the taste of rope song still slick in my mouth. The veil hummed like a choir of empty cups. I put my hand on the charm and pressed until it hurt, until I was sure I was awake. Behind me, in the hall of statues, a sound like a breath moving through stone traveled the length of the corridor, very soft, very patient, as if someone who had not breathed in a long time was remembering how we left at moonrise. Chapter 2. The Cathedral of Bone. The moon went thin as a fish bone while we packed. Vay brought a satchel that did not look big enough to carry anything important and somehow swallowed a coil of rope, a small knife with a handle that remembered who had held it before, 3 apples the size of a child's fist, and a bottle of something that smelled like rain in a mine. Kael himself wore no visible weapon beyond a ring that watched me when it thought I wasn't looking. You said to wear something that can be torn, I told him when he entered the small room again. I had pulled on a dress of rough weave the color of slate and tied my hair back with a blue ribbon I had stolen from Etta the year she'd been kind to me about a broken plate. The charm lay against my skin like a small, thoughtful animal. I felt plain enough to be a shadow and glad of it. It suits you, he said, and before my charm could decide how to behave, I felt it warm at the edges and cool at the center, as if truth and courtesy had shaken hands. Maps? Vay asked. already leading us down a corridor that decided abruptly to be a stair of bent copper. Or are you going to trust your feet to remember what your mouth promised them? Maps bring envy into places that dislike being looked at, Kael said. We'll use what we have. What we have, Vey said comfortably, is a woman who can hear songs and a king who refuses to admit he's lost. Do you mind? I asked, matching my steps to theirs as the hall swung into an arcade of glass ribs. That I can hear them, I mean. He prays. Mind? Vey glanced back. I mind that I can't. The world is less noisy to me than it ought to be. We passed beneath an arch that looked like two hands pressed together in prayer and emerged into a courtyard paved with tessellated shadow. The stag waited there, a black figure cut out of a deeper black. When Kael moved nearer, it lowered its head, as if greeting a brother. Sea of pines first, he said, and to the stag he said something that felt like the memory of winter grass beneath my feet. The palace gates went back without a sound. A smell rose from the forest like a hymn, sung through teeth, resin and cold earth, and the sweetness of something dead that hadn't learned to give up being sweet. We did not mount. The stag remained a herald and a guide, not a horse, but the path opened the way water opens when a shape it recognizes slides into it. Gloam did not have night and day so much as gradations of open and closed eye. We began in the hour of the half-lidded gaze, when color had legs but not mouths. I tried to count our steps. Counting failed in Gloam. It preferred stories to numbers. After a time that was a short story and a long breath, the trees gathered into ranks. Their trunks were narrow and straight, their needles shivered, and the skin beneath my skin pricked, as if someone were writing quietly on it with a thorn. The sea of pines, Vey murmured. Keep your eyes forward. There's a school of shadows that follows travelers. They don't bite unless looked at. What happens if I look at them? I asked, because the question arrived like a leaf in the wind light, unimportant until it wasn't. They turn into something you recognize, Kael said, pocketing his hands as if to keep them from too easy offers. And then they ask you to follow. Who did they turn into for you? I asked without permission and immediately regretted it. Boldness tastes hot until it cools in your mouth like iron. He did not pretend not to understand. Once, he said, a boy who had my mouth and not my father's hands. The charm at my throat warmed for truth and for wound. I did not pry further. The pine sang thinly, 1,000 small bright notes arranged in a sheet of music the wind could punch holes in. Beneath that, something larger. I thought of the wall's heart in 3 pieces. I thought of the saints of hunger keeping ledgers. I had never imagined hunger writing anything down. I had imagined it devouring the list to avoid the indignity of being named. Cathedral is within? I asked. Beneath, Kael said. Pines throw down their dead into hymnals. The saints copied their pages into bone. You, Vey said to me, will need to be careful what you hear. The saints sing in the shape of debts. Your gift may want to answer them. What happens if I answer? They tabulate you, Kael said, with too much softness for the topic. They make you a column where the sums never close. Has this happened to other brides? I asked, unable to keep the bite from the word. The trees didn't care. They liked bite. He did not look away. It has happened to other kings. The path sharpened. The ground beneath our boots had begun to click faintly, as if small teeth were closing and opening. I looked down and saw pale slivers beneath the carpet of needles. Not shells. Fragments of birds' wishbones, mice skulls, deer ribs. It should have revolted me. It did, and it did not. Everything dies, and everything arranges the dead. The pines had chosen architecture. The stag halted before a clearing that was not clear. The trees stopped abruptly as if a blade had parted them. The ground curved downward into a bowl wide as my village, with a mouth at its center. A great, dark oculus ringed in ivory treads. Carved steps spiraled into the dark. Around the rim, the pines had woven their roots into a balustrade that looked disturbingly like fingers gripping a rail. "Do we knock?" I asked. Vey threw a pebble into the dark. It clicked and clicked below until the sound wasn't sound anymore, but a suggestion that sound had once been possible. "You aren't dawn-born," Kael said to the void. "You don't have to make us perform a proof," something below answered. It was not a voice. It was a shift in the shape of silence, the way a held breath decides which way to exhale. Cold stroked my ankles. Lines of hoarfrost wrote themselves along the stair's ivory lip and melted quickly, as if ashamed of being visible. "Permission," Kael said. "We descend under no names. We descend to audit." The last word made the air tighten. Audit. The saints of hunger love their ledgers. A book loves being read, even if it hates the reader. We began down. The spiral bled our edges into the dark. The stag would not follow. It stood at the rim, its breath steam and patient complaint. Vey went ahead, lighter than a rumor. Kael followed him, a weight that steadied the stair. I went last, fingers skimming the bone rail. It was smooth in some places and ridged in others, the saved texture of lives. The first hall was made of skulls, small, large, horned, hornless, human and almost human, arranged into a barrel vault with such exquisite care I felt dizzy. Candles burned in cradles carved from jawbones. I expected a smell of rot. There was no rot. There was the clean, salt air of old libraries, the faint copper of bled coins, a sweetness that might have been sap. We emerged into a nave. If the hall had been the throat, this was the heart of the place. Columns rose like the ribs of a giant executed with mercy and then convinced to stand again as devotion. Pews were bench-long knee bones laid side by side. At the far end, an altar, a plank of scapulae laid upon femurs. Behind it, a wall of names carved into vertebrae. The names moved when I blinked. They shed, slightly, the way snakes do, leaving behind vellum-thin ghosts of themselves. "You do not bow," Vey murmured. "Not with my head," Kael said. "We are not here to worship, and to as Vilplier." Ahead, something shifted its veil. A figure leaned up out of the altar shadow, a slow unrolling like a scroll that had forgotten it was a body. It wore no face and all faces. Its cloak was ossuary dusk, where its hands emerged. They were bones and also fingers and also quills. "Accountants," Vey whispered to me, which wasn't helpful and was a sort of kindness. "We seek a portion," Kael said, his voice selecting the vowels that courts listened to. "A heart piece, ledger stored, contracted under the jealousy of a god and the hubris of a king." The thing's head tilted minutely. The candle's flames did the same, as if a wind had been drafted and then stood to attention. The figure raised its hands. The quill fingers scratched the air and left ink on it. Lines stretched from column to column. Something inside the air began to sum us. "Elowen," Kael said softly, without turning his head. "Listen, not to obey, to overhear." I had been trying not to. Now I did on purpose. At first it was simple. The ticking of the charm, the soft clutch of the bones beneath our feet, the wet promise of wax listening to its own drip. Then the music entered. thin as a pin and then wide as a field, the cathedral sang. Not a hymn, arithmetic, columns of sound, debts measured in breaths held and released, in eyes closed too soon, in hands not held. A metric for hunger, how long you had wanted, how much you had been denied, how angrily you had counted the mouths that ate before you. The saints' accounting pressed against me, interested. It recognized in me what I knew and what I pretended I didn't, the way I had learned, young, to save bits of myself for later, because later would be worse. The wall eats love, Kael had said. I had rationed it before the wall asked. The arithmetic approved me. It wanted to notarize me. No, I said aloud, startling my own breath. You don't have my sums. The quill fingers paused, the head cocked. In the ink-drawn ledger in the air, a line of numbers blurred as if ashamed. We request, Kael said, remittance of an item wrongly held, a heart fragment, deposited under false pretense, pledged in the currency of vows, proof of fraud, Vey said, because he liked the bones of a thing visible, or of a misled witness, or of a ledger kept in a room with too little light. The figure reached beneath the altar. It was not emotion. It was an intent made manifest more quickly than muscles could manage. When it raised its hand again, it held a bowl that was not made of any bone I recognized. The bowl was translucent. Inside it, something that was not light and not darkness turned slowly, like a seed deciding which way to split. The ledger in the air flipped to a page that sat between one century and the next and refused to be convinced it belonged to either. Lines assembled themselves. A name appeared in letters that glinted when I didn't look, Varis Kael, and beside it a series of entries that made the bones of the cathedral ache. Don't read them, Kael said to me quietly. They're true and boring, and the worst kind of trap. Boring? Vey snorted softly, though his eyes had gone distant and cold. Is that what we're calling manslaughter of a god's appetite? Line by line? Proof, the figure whispered, not a syllable. A scrape that carved the air and didn't undo itself. Kael's hand moved as if to touch the bowl and then did not. Proof that the heart fragment is wrongfully held, he said. Proof that the wall's contract requires rereading. I, who signed part of it, asked. The quills lifted. The air ledger considered. I felt its consideration in my molars. The bowl's slow-turning seed quickened, stuttered, stilled. The saints of hunger love when someone confesses in their language. They hate when someone uses their forms against them. Tell it a story, Vey murmured. Something it can't count. What can't a ledger count? I whispered back, and Kael's mouth tilted as if at a private joke. Mercy, he said. Grace, anything that refuses to be returned to sender. He did not step nearer the altar. He did not raise his hands. He told a story, and because he told it in the cathedral of bone, the bones remembered how to be quiet, while someone admitted to being wrong. Once, Kael said, and the quills shivered like dogs shaking off water. A king bargained against a god in broad daylight, thinking daylight an ally. He promised love to a wall to keep love from a door. He fed it. He believed the wall was better than the door because he could measure the wall. He could not measure the world beyond the door. He did not know how to count hope, only hands, heads, years. He taught his people to ration the thing he had sworn to spend. He kept them alive. He kept them small. The ledger disliked stories. It tried to convert it into a column. I heard it fail. Once, Kael said, more softly, a boy promised his father he would never beg. He grew into a man who didn't ask for help. He married vows, and they ate his wives. He honored the dead more carefully than the living because the dead kept still. He did not learn how to love without rations until too late, and then he learned he had built a city of statues to keep from seeing his own stillness. The bowl hummed. The seed inside nudged the side like a heartbeat that wasn't. The charm at my throat went hot and then cool. It couldn't decide whether this was truth or something unruly adjacent to truth. I stepped forward. Once, I said, a girl who heard the names of rivers learned to shut her ears because her village told her to. She rationed her listening. She rationed her laughter. She thought if she gave her love to no one, the wall could not eat it. And then she learned that rationing is a prayer you say backwards. She learned that hunger keeps ledgers but love keeps no books. She learned from a king who pretended he was boring that the law can be a story, and a story can cut a law. The figure did not move, but the bowl in its hands trembled once, and the ledger in the air produced an error. I had never known ledgers could err. The ink went red with apology, and then black with fury, and then instead of adding, a line undid itself like a knot. The wall's heart fragment, which had turned like a bored star, brightened, dimmed, and suddenly looked very much like a thing that wanted to be taken. Remittance, Kael said, voice steady and quiet. Under the clause of misheld mercy, under the clause of changed testimony, under the clause of a witness who refused to be tabulated. The cathedral's ribs creaked, I felt, with the weird knowledge gloam had slipped into my bones that somewhere far off the veil shifted its weight and a million small hungers adjusted their mouths. The figure extended the bowl. It did so reluctantly. It did so because contract requires what appetite does not. "Fee?" it rasped. "Of course," Vey said grimly. "There's always a fee." "Gold?" I asked, foolishly, because I still belonged to a village with coins. "Not gold," Kael said. He had gone paler, but his mouth was still calm. "The saints of hunger accept only what unbalances their books back to their favor. Give them something you haven't saved." "What is that?" I asked. The music pressed close. It smelled almost like summer, and also like a room that had forgotten the window was open. "Firsts," Vey said, and his voice, which I had not thought to crack, cracked. "They love firsts. First true thing you said aloud. First person you forgave. First kiss you meant." My mouth tasted of iron again. The charm at my throat leapt. "No, I can pay," Kael said, and his voice was the shape of a decision already made. "They have much of me. They can have more." "What will you give them?" I asked, throat tight. He did not hesitate. "The first time I wanted a child, silence is not always deciding. Sometimes it is recoil." "Kael," Vey said sharply, "don't. You can't." "I remember it," Kael said, almost to himself, as if memory were a thing he could lay on the altar. "A courtyard, the scent of green pears, a woman. No, her name is not for this room. The wish was, it was the first bright wish I had that was not about keeping a door closed. I kept it long enough to bury it. They can have its light." He stepped forward. He did not kneel. He removed his ring, and for a moment the room felt strangely naked. He placed his hand on the bowl and bowed his head, and the cathedral's bones made a sound that was not a groan and not a hymn. The seed in the bowl flickered like a thought catching. Kael inhaled sharply. When he raised his face, something in it had gone still. Not dead, still, as if a bird had flown from a branch and there would be no new nest in that tree. "Fee paid." the figure rasped, satisfied, and the ledger licked the air with ink that tasted of approval and blood. "No," I said, and the word came out before I could be polite to fate. Not only his. Kael's head turned toward me very slowly. They swore softly in a language my charm pretended not to understand. "I will not be a passenger," I said, louder now, because if you don't say a thing loudly enough, the cathedral writes over it. "Take a fee from me, not a first that I would hold hostage to my own fear, but something I have too much of, something that has kept the wall fat." The figure considered me, and the lines of the ledger shifted in the air like eels. My chest ached. The charm burned. My ears rang with sums. I could feel the cathedral deciding where to place me. Debtor, creditor, witness, meal. "I give you," I said, and it felt like tearing fabric from meat. The reflex to ration, the impulse to save love to keep myself safe. "I give you the habit of half-offering. Take it. Take the instinct. I will learn to live without it." A hush fell so complete the candles forgot to think. Even the bones paused. Kael's eyes were on me, gray gone almost colorless. "Elowen," he said, and the name was not warning and not plea. It was astonishment becoming respect, and that becoming something I refused to inventory. "Fee," the figure whispered, pleased. It did not know how to count what I had offered. That made it hungry. Hunger loves what it cannot easily chew. I stepped forward. I put my hand beside Kael's on the bowl. Cold ran up my arm to my shoulder and then down my spine like a second skeleton sliding into place. For a heartbeat, I tasted every half-held breath I had kept as a child. I tasted every time I had not said I loved something because I feared the wall would hear. The taste broke. I reeled. The figure drew back. The ledger in the air locked. The bowl lightened in our hands. The seed settled into something like a shard of glass with something beating slowly inside it, as if tired but determined not to give into tiredness. "Remitted," the cathedral said, in a dozen bone creaks and a single almost word. "Held until claimed." Claimed. The bowl offered itself. Kael did not take it. He looked at me. I reached, and the shard came away with the easy horror of a tooth given gladly. The bowl went colorless and then dull. The candles bent. The knave inhaled and exhaled once the way a creature does when it convinces itself to stand up after a long grief. "Thank you," Kael said into the listening space. He put his ring back on. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the ring tightened, and the skin beneath it remembered heat. "We won't audit you again." "We will," they muttered. "But not for this." We withdrew. The spiral felt longer on the way up, as if the cathedral had tugged our shadows loose and wanted to remember the shapes of our calves. When we reached the rim, the stag snorted and shook its head so violently its antlers wrote two angry syllables in the air. Pines sang. Something at the edge of my listening cracked open and confessed to missing us, which was both flattering and troubling. Only when we had taken 20 paces into the forest did I stumble. The habit of ration, gone its absence, made a space in me that breezes move through. It hurt, and it did not. I realized I had been bracing myself against a wall that had stood inside my ribs as well as on a border of the world. Without it, I was taller or thinner or something. I did not know how to stand without leaning. Kael's hand found my elbow and steadied me. "What did it take?" he asked, very quietly. "What I gave it," I said, and for the first time in years the words did not feel like a hoarded thing. It took my habit of withholding. He was silent, a silence that did not tabulate. Then, that is cruel. Not to me, I said. Maybe to anyone who expected me to save them from my love. He looked away so quickly it was almost comical. Vey didn't laugh. He never laughed at the wrong joke. The wall felt that, Vey said. Everything neighboring appetite trembles when appetite is not fed. How long until it bites? I asked. In another place to make up the difference? Kael glanced up. Above, the moon kept its hollow bite. The pines rattled thinly. Not long, he said. The sun-reef. Water, Vey said. Shall I fetch us boats? We'll walk, Kael said. It's quicker. He looked at me. Can you? He was at man's. I can, I said, though my legs were telling complicated lies about how much they disliked both cathedrals and kings. We moved. Gloam folded distances like laundry. Pine subsided into something like dunes. The ground underfoot learned the language of silt. The air turned to glass filled with salt and then to salt filled with light. When the forest broke, it was not into horizon but into a sudden drop. Before us lay water stretched so far the mind couldn't fit it into one thought. Beneath the skin of the sea, I saw pale ribs and towers, arches and avenues. A city had drowned here. The sun had died here and left a reef of bones to prove it had once owned a cathedral of its own. The sun-reef, Vey said unnecessarily. Even I, younger than this sea, older than my fear, knew a holy ruin when I saw one. We go under? I asked. I am not a fish. I am not even a very good swimmer. The river sang to me when I was little and then laughed when I tried to answer with my legs. We go where the water remembers it was stone, Kael said. There are steps in the light. They go down as far as you can afford to breathe. That's not a measurement, I said, dry-mouthed. It is, he said, just not yours. Vey produced from the satchel 3 loops of braid that looked like rope knotted by someone who loved knots too much. Air keepers, he said. If you trade them truth, they will hold your breath for you. If you lie to them, they forget how to count to 1. How many truths do they cost? I asked. As many as you can offer without becoming only confession, Kael said. The creature below guards the second shard. It doesn't remember its name. Names matter underwater. They don't travel well. And after? I asked. After the reef, we come back to statues. Closer than we think, Vey said. The close piece is always the farthest. Is that a proverb? I asked, taking the loop Vey offered me, feeling its weave settle against my palm like a live thing that might burrow into skin if allowed. It is a warning, Kael said, and then he looked at the sea as if it might look back the way river water does when it decides that if you were to drown it would be a shame because you are not yet old enough for good ghosts. We knotted the air keepers around our throats. They tightened once like promises and then lay limp, curious. Kael stepped to the lip and took my hand again very matter-of-factly. The last time he had touched me, he'd done it to pull me through a veil. This time, he did it to keep me from convincing myself that a drop into a ghost city was a reasonable place to reconsider all my choices. The creature below, I said, because questions can be a better ladder than silence. What does it want? Names, Vey said, and the taste of vows that were never spoken. I am empty of one of those, I said. You are already fuller than you were, Kael corrected, and when I looked at him I could not bear the steadiness in his face. So I looked away. The charm on my chest warmed, neither warning nor comfort, merely acknowledgment. I was uncomfortable because something true had walked into the room. We went down. There were steps. They made no sense. Water slid off them the way shame slides off a person who has decided never to be ashamed again. Light hunched in niches like monks trying to pray in a storm. We descended into a brightness that wasn't brightness, all bluish, not light, and the world narrowed to the pressure of the air-keeper loop and the pull of Kael's hand and the far-off, too near sound of a thing that had forgotten whether it rose or sank. The drowned city revealed itself in slices. A colonnade of pillars leaned drunkenly into a court where fish knelt in rows like nuns. Statues lay on their sides and watched us without pupils. An inscription slithered across a frieze and then turned its face away, embarrassed to be read. The water wasn't cold. It was simply indifferent. Indifference hurts more than cold. It does not conspire with you to make you feel noble for suffering. We reached a door without hinges that remembered the word open and let us through. Beyond, a hall of glass. In the glass, not fish, not people. Something that had once been people and once been fish and now had the patience of moss and the curiosity of orphans. They watched us with the polite hunger of things fed only at ceremonies. At the end of the hall, a basin. In the basin, a ripple that did not reflect us. When I stepped nearer, my face in it was someone else's, a little, dark-haired boy with stubbornness built into the corners of his mouth. "Names," said a voice like a net drawn up full of coins and bleeding light. "Names. Does it want ours?" I asked. "It wants the ones we forgot," Kael said softly. I thought of Edda, of my mother's thumb drawing a circle, of my father leaving because he had not believed a circle could keep the kind of wolves he feared. I thought of the women in the hall of statues and how very much not statues they had once been. I thought of myself as a child sitting by the river, singing its name back to it and being told by a priest that the river didn't need its name said so often for it to remain a river. "I am Elowen Reed," I said to the water. "I am the sound of a reed bed in winter when a fox has gone through and the birds decide whether to tell on him, and I am the lie that if I make no sound, nothing will come for me." The water listened with magnificent boredom. The loop around my throat cooled. It had taken a truth and saved it for me. Kael put his hand on the basin. "I am Kael Varis," he said, "and I do not beg. I am the boy who promised a door would stay shut and became a man who measured mercy and pretended that was love." The water rippled. It liked that. It liked the sound of a truth that had tried very hard to be a virtue. Ve spoke gently, as if to a horse that has decided fences are suggestions. "I am Ve, and I have other names, but I gave them to a bird so I would forget how they made me kind. I have never forgiven the person who taught me to like being the knife between a mouth and a hand." The water sighed. The hall sighed with it. The drowned city shifted, a slow settling. From beneath the basin, something uncoiled. Not a snake exactly, not an eel, something like a script that had been written too many times until the ink decided to become animal. It rose and rose, all translucence and memory, with a head shaped like a question no one had had the courage to ask. "Names," it said again, and this time I heard the lack in it. It had none. It could only say the word for what it wanted. The wall had eaten its name the way it ate love. The wall isn't choosy. It chews until there are no questions left worth asking. "What did they call you?" I asked, closing my fingers around the edge of the basin because gravity prefers you keep hold of something when you reach for a thing that can't be held. Before the sun drowned here, before the reef learned prayer, it moved closer. The loops on our throats tightened. They always tighten when the water makes a new friend of the space between you and it. The creature's head bent toward me. In its skin moved small lights, like the reflections of leaf lanterns in summer. I listened, not to its voice, it had none, but to the pressure of it against the world. Something opened a room in an old house in a hot season, a hand lifting a veil, a word whispered against a wrist list, not a human's name alone, a title, a duty, a sound the mouth makes when it chooses flame and water at once. "Lace," I said, and the creature shuddered with a joy so simple and so enormous, it shook the silt off the drowned capitals and made the statues blink the blink of those who have learned to wait well. "Lise?" I said again, and the charm at my throat went cold, then hot, then settled, as if even it were willing to admit there are times when proof is not the point. "Lise?" the creature repeated, its whole long body becoming the word. It touched my hand. It was not slimy. It was purposeful. It coiled once around my wrist, and in that embrace was recognition, and in that recognition was gift. Beneath the basin, something pulsed. The second fragment, guarded by a creature that had forgotten itself, remembered. It split the water like a small dawn. Kael reached for it. Lys went still. I looked at Kael and shook my head once. For reasons I could not count, it needed to be me. Not because I was brave, because the habit I had given away had made a space a name could live in without being rationed. I slid my hand down into the basin. Cold traveled up my arm like a map, showing where I had not yet gone. My fingers closed around something that beat once and then stopped like a bird trapped in a net that sees the sky open and refuses to believe it. I drew it up. It was heavier than the first. It looked like a shard of morning trapped in glass and taught to breathe in slow measures. Lys bowed a movement that in an eel thing is more beautiful than in a courtier. It turned its long head toward Kael and Ve, and then toward the drowned doors, as if to say, "Go." The loops at our throats tightened again, a warning against bragging in a place that prefers silence. We went. We did not run. Running underwater is a way to learn how the water jokes. The city let us leave the way an old house allows guests to go if they have remembered to compliment the windows. We reached the steps that were not steps and climbed through the patience of a dead Sunday. When we broke the surface, the air forgot it had been water a moment ago and let us be animals again. I did not cry. I coughed and gagged and laughed, once in a small, ugly sound that frightened a gull. Kael didn't laugh. He looked at me hard, with an expression I had never wanted, and now wanted too much. Gratitude that did not demand, that did not shrink, that did not pretend it came without cost. "Lys," I said to the water, because names deserve to be said more than once, and because the creature had given us what it guarded without requiring us to be smaller than our fear. A smooth head broke the surface a moment, a greeting, and vanished. We did not walk away immediately. We stood on the rim of the drowned world and let our lungs recalculate. Ve ashed water from his cuffs with irritation that felt like fondness, disguised as tidiness. The stag on the cliff shook itself as if it had gone down with us, and now was permitted to be irritated too. "That leaves the third," Ve said after a time. "The close one." "Have it." "The statues," I said, and the shard in my palm beat a little faster, as if eager for its sibling, as if the two pieces recognized one another the way young animals do when separated too early and then set to run side by side in a field. We went back by a way that felt shorter than it had any right to be. The sea of pines sang us through, and the shadows did not insist we look at them. The stag set a pace that did not break me, and for that small mercy I was unaccountably grateful. I did not ration it. I let myself be grateful, without saving any of it for later. It left me sore and warm and less alone than I had been when we entered Gloamspire rose like a thought that refused to be ignored. The hall of statues received us with a silence that had learned to converse. We did not light candles. The light here came from the veined silver Kael had drawn earlier with his touch, and from some other source, the belief of the stones that they might as well glow a little, given what they contained. I had not gone close before. I went now. The women and a few men were not arranged according to height or habit or stations in life. They were arranged according to something else, an order I could not hear at first. I stood before one. Her face had the beauty of a person who had laughed much and been careful with her cruelty. Her hands had been folded to save the sculptor embarrassment. Her eyes looked toward a door that wasn't there. "Honors," Kael said, almost beneath breath, as if the word itself were a coverlet he kept pulling up over a body that could not warm itself. "Graves," I said. "You said the third piece sits in a bowl no one is allowed to touch." He nodded toward the far end of the hall. There, under an arch like a wish held between two fingers, a pedestal waited. On the pedestal, a bowl. It was simple. It was the simplest thing in the room. Its simplicity made my teeth ache. Inside it, not like the others had looked, not seed, not shard, a small, irregular stone lay. It looked like a heart a child would draw, and then pocket, and then forget until washing day. "Why, no one can touch it," Vay said conversationally as we approached. "Is not rules, it is grief." "We touched the cathedral's bowl," I said. "We helped it keep a better book." "This bowl keeps no books," Kael said. "It keeps time. It keeps the precise moment a bride decides." "Decides what?" I asked, although the answer had already climbed through my bones. "To be a bride," he said, "or to be a witness. Both break different parts of the world." We stood before the bowl. The shard in my hand thudded. The other in Kael's ring answered. In the small child stone beat a third measure that didn't match theirs and somehow made harmony of the mismatch. I lifted my hand. The charm at my throat went very still, like a nap that is too deep. "What is the fee here?" I asked. "Whom do we pay? Numbers? Names? Grief?" Kael said nothing. His jaw had gone rigid. Vay watched me with a care I had not seen him grant anyone, like a man at a cliff's edge watching a friend decide whether the fall is worth the flight. I reached toward the bowl and the room whispered to me. Not in arithmetic, not in story, in faces. Every statue breathed once. Just a little, not lungs, not stone, something in between. Their exhale did not move the air. It moved something else. The habit of keeping your hands to yourself in a room full of the dead, the fear that touching a sacred thing will set a trap off in your life, the recollection that you are never the only person who pays for the things you take. "I won't ration this," I said, "but I won't steal." "What then?" Vay asked gently. "I'll ask," I said. "To whom?" Kael's voice was hoarse. He was not used to asking. "To the woman who chose and expected to become stone and became a note instead," I said, because the song had finally arranged itself where my ordinary ears could hear it. I turned from the bowl to the first statue. "Tell me," I whispered. "Tell me what you decided so that I can decide something too." She did not move. She did not have to. The life in a room full of unlife has its own paths, and it followed my voice as if the floor wanted it to. I walked. Statues are not in order of height or habit or station. They are in order of choice. This one had chosen to be remembered. That one had chosen to be unmade. Another had chosen to be sent out, errand after errand, until she returned with her heart too thin to sew. At the end, nearest the bowl, a statue who had chosen to keep nothing for herself, and so had learned too late. She had given away the part that would have recognized kindness when it finally came back to her door. She had a face I knew. She had a mouth shaped like a refusal smoothed by love. She had a name that came to my mouth before I knew I had it. "Mother," I said, and the room went soundless. I do not mean my mother. Not the woman who pressed a circle on my brow and slipped a moon-metal charm into my palm. I mean the woman who had married herself to the border so that the children in beech woods could sleep, who had forgiven the wall for eating what she gave it, who had asked for nothing but bread, and then learned bread is a love story too, if you let it be. I knew her because she sang in my bones, the way a song does that you think is yours until you realize it is the one your mother used to hum in the kitchen. She was my mother's 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 sister. She was the reason my mother drew circles. She was the reason the circle did not keep me, and did not keep Etta, and did not keep anyone except long enough to make choice look like duty. I put my hand to her stone cheek. It was cool. It was not indifferent. The charm lay between my skin and the record of a singer who had given herself to numbers. It clicked once, like an old lock remembering the shape of a key. "Do I ask you?" I whispered. "Or do I tell you? Do I say please? Or do I say I am taking this back?" The stone held its breath. "Ask," Kael said. His voice, behind me, was not a king's voice. It was a man who had remembered the smell of green pears and decided to go on living anyway. Then I made my mouth humble and not small. There's a difference, and the statues know it. "Lady," I said, and the name under her was a drift of letters that spelled a dozen women into one. "Please, we need what the wall used to chew. We will ruin its teeth." A long, patient moment. A sound like frost descending stairs. The bowl in the corner brightened, not with light, but with the particular attention a room pays to the person who has said the right word in the right tone, which is the whole of spellwork and the whole of love, if we are honest. The stone under my hand warmed not with life, but with permission. "Take it," the hall said. I went to the bowl. I did not hurry. Hurrying in halls of decision is a way to trip over your future. I put my fingers around the small, irregular stone. It did not beat. It made a sound in me, like a breath finally remembered. When I lifted it, the statues exhaled again, and the air didn't move and everything else did. The three pieces hummed at one another a low, complicated chord, like a door taking off its hinges. "It will fight," Faye said, as if we were making stew, and he was warning me about a bone I might not see until I bit down. "The wall. It will try to teach us regret." "I am tired," Kael said quietly, "of lessons that come with rope." "We will need a place," I said, holding the three in my two hands like a woman who has been given a basket full of eggs that are more important than breakfast. "A place to break a heart and not let the pieces run back to what they were doing before." "Dun-ta." "The hollow in the moon," Kael said. He said it as if he had been keeping the idea the way you keep a knife hidden in the hem of your coat, not because you intend violence, but because the world is badly sewn. It is a mouth. It wants to speak. We will feed it something better than love. "What?" I asked, and I felt my mouth go dry and wet at once. "Is better than love?" Love unrationed, he said. Love that refuses to be counted. Love that returns to sender and then refuses to be the sender or the receiver. Love that becomes a place instead of a tally. I looked at him. I did not ration it. I let myself feel what I felt, and what I felt was not trust exactly and not disbelief exactly, but a decision to cross a room toward a person who might hurt me, because the room needed crossing, and because I had already been hurt by the furniture we call safety. When? I said, because someone had to be sensible enough to arrange the impossible into steps. Do we go to the moon? When the veil breathes in, Vey answered, because he is the kind of man who knows the timing of things even kings pretend are accidents. When the wall thinks it is not being watched. When children in beech woods are making up songs to sing while they fetch water. That is soon, I said. It is always soon, Kael said. And then he surprised me. He touched my cheek. Not the way a man touches a woman in a story when he wants to leave fingerprints. The way a king touches his own face in a mirror when he has decided to meet himself. His hand was warm and the ring did not look at me. Elowen, he said, and he made my name into a place I might live in for a while without asking whether it had a roof. Thank you. For what? I asked. And the charm warmed not with knowledge but with approval, which is a different weight and a different light, and something I had not been given often enough to recognize quickly. For not teaching me your ration, he said, for spending, and a call. Vey made a sound like a man being polite to an emotion he had been taught to fold, not wear. We should hurry, he said. I hear a priest's rope in my teeth. The dawn-born will not forgive being turned back at our gate. They will try to pull the veil's hem when we climb for its mouth. We moved. The stag stamped and tossed its script into the air. One word I did not know, and one I did. Now, the shards pulsed against my skin where I had tucked them, one beneath the cord of my charm, one in the hollow of my other hand, one in a pocket I had not known this dress possessed, as if the seamstress had believed in emergencies. We crossed a courtyard where the shadows hung like laundry. We entered a stair that turned and did not finish turning. We climbed into a tower that had no top until it did. At the highest platform, there was a door that opened onto nothing. Beyond, the sky carried its hollowed moon like a bowl held by a tired god. Can we reach it? I asked. Foolish and not foolish. Gloam had taught me to stop asking the kind of questions that assume doors are for walls. We can call it, Kael said. It will lower its mouth if we sing with the right uncounted notes. Names? I asked. Or mercies? Or both, he said. And something else you brought without knowing. What's that? I asked. And before he could answer, the wind struck us with a phrase that tasted of rope-sung names and new iron. The dawn-born had not gone home to rethink. They had gone around to the side of a thing they did not understand and decided to push from there. The veil shivered. The hollow in the moon flickered. The shards in my hands woke and knocked at my bones as if wanting to be let out to play at last. Vey took his place at the edge, his hands held as if ready to argue in the language of weather. Kael looked at me and did not need to say anything, and so said the one thing that is better than instruction. Listen, he said. I did, not to the ropes, not to the priests, not to the king, not to my own fear. I listened to the children at the beech trees making up a song to go fetch water, and to my mother's thumb drawing a circle on my brow, and to the river making space for a fox, and then for me, and to a creature in drowned light, saying its name as if it had never believed it could again, and to a cathedral admitting it had kept a book too carefully, and to a wall that had fed for too long, and was about to be made very hungry in a way that would not kill the children in their beds. I opened my mouth, I sang. Not beautiful, true. The moon tipped. The hollow came down like a bowl from a high shelf, placed in a child's careful hands. Behind us, the veil rattled like 1,000 thin things, remembering they could be strings, not bars. They threw night like water on a fire, and the fire became steam, and the steam decided it was fog and went home. The ropes tried to bite. The shadows bit back. I sang again. The uncounted notes, the ones my habit would have saved for later, and which now would never be saved by me again. Kael's hand found mine. The shards beat once, twice, 3 times, and in their rhythm I heard a heart that had eaten love for too long and was about to be fed something it could not digest and would have to become instead. "Ready?" he asked, and his voice was not a command and not a request. It was an invitation and a vow with its hands open, not clenched. "Yes," I said, and the charm at my throat lay against skin and did not argue at all.